conclusion of the talk, we'll have a Q&A, and then we invite you all to join us downstairs for the book signing and further conversation. Our next Cottage Conversation will be held on Thursday, November 19th, and feature Michael Onderegg, author of the new book Lincoln and Shakespeare, and Michelle Auchereau of the Folger Shakespeare Library. So I hope you also join us for that. Tonight we're celebrating both an exhibit opening of American My Belief and the kickoff of our 2015-2016 Cottage Conversation series. We are grateful for the generous contributions from the Abraham Lincoln Bicentennial Foundation, which helped support the exhibit. And also, we could not have accomplished American by Belief without considerable guidance from a lot of our advisors, including Dr. Silverman, the American Immigration Council, and the many families who provided their stories for that exhibit. I also want to acknowledge the members of our board who are here tonight. Please raise your hands so that people can see you. We're grateful for their guidance and support. And I'd like to mention Jim Tenney's and David Bruce Smith in particular, who have been longtime supporters of Cottage Conversations, so thank you very much. Exhibits like this on a small staff like ours also wind up being a full staff effort, but I want to call out in particular Callie Hawkins, our Associate Director for Programs. Callie, please stand. Callie served as our curator for this exhibit, and though he can't be here with us this evening, Jeffrey Larry, our preservation manager, helped significantly with the installation of the exhibit. On July 4th of 1864, Lincoln and his family moved to the cottage for the start of their last season here. That same day, Lincoln signed into law an act to encourage immigration, the first comprehensive immigration law in American history. Lincoln's signature immigration law may not be as widely regarded as the Gettysburg Address or the Emancipation Proclamation, but as Silverman's book reveals, it's no less important. The issues Lincoln grappled with while living here in these very rooms are the predecessors of what we face today. Huge strides were made here, but even Lincoln recognized that more work had to be done to achieve our nation's ideals. This is a hopeful setting for this conversation tonight and for the exhibit. Joining us tonight to celebrate the launch of our new exhibit, American by Belief, is Dr. Jason Silverman of Winthrop University and Ben Johnson, Executive Director of the American Immigration Council, to discuss Dr. Silverman's new book, Lincoln and the Immigrant. Jason Silverman is the Ellison Capers Palmer Jr. Professor of History at Winthrop University, where he has taught for 31 years. Prior to that, he taught for 4 years at Yale University. Before writing Lincoln and the Immigrant, published by Southern Illinois University Press, Silverman was author and editor of 10 previous titles, several of which were nominated for National Book Awards. Silverman is a former South Carolina Professor of the Year and holds degrees from University of Kentucky, Colorado State University, and University of Virginia. Ben Johnson is the Executive Director of the American Immigration Council in Washington, D.C. He has studied and worked in the immigration field for more than 20 years. He has written extensively on immigration law and policy and has presented testimony on immigration issues before the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives. From 2003 to 2007, he served as the founding director of the Council's Immigration Policy Center, which is one of the 4 programs housed at the American Immigration Council, and also includes the Legal Action Center, International Exchange Center, and Community Education Center. A native of Arizona, Johnson has managed several statewide political campaigns in that state and also spent 6 years as the co-founder and legal director of the Immigration Outreach Center, a legal clinic serving low-income immigrant communities in Phoenix. He earned his JD from the University of San Diego School of Law and studied international and comparative law at King's College in London. We've all heard the claim that there are over 16,000 books written on Abraham Lincoln, but this is the first book focused on Lincoln and immigration. In this book, Dr. Silverman unveils Lincoln's evolving personal, professional, and political relationship with various immigrant groups he encountered throughout his life. One reviewer practically made the case for her exhibit, saying that it was highly recommended not only for what it reveals about Lincoln's ideas on immigration, but also for the insights provided 21st century Americans who wrestle with similar immigration issues today. Please join me in welcoming Jason Silverman and Ben Johnson.
Thank you very much, Aaron, to the Lincoln Cottage, to Callie, thank you for being here. And heartfelt thanks for me, right? Because it's a rare thing that I get to talk about immigration issues in a setting that's academic and thoughtful. That's not been my experience in immigration over the last 20 years. Mostly it's Fox News, 20-second sound bites, and immigrants hate them or just kind of hate them. Yes, so I am very grateful to be here, and Jason, I'm particularly grateful to have had the chance to read your book, which I did, and grateful for the contribution that you've made really in the subject. I know that we know that there's a lot of history around immigration, even though we get mired in the day-to-day of the immigration debate. All of us, I think, are aware of the fact that this is an issue that we've wrestled with before, that we know that there are these figures in history, whether it's recent history of Ronald Reagan or Eisenhower, or lots of folks who sort of images of people that have dealt with this issue in immigration. But I have to confess, I never made the connection with Lincoln and immigration. And I think I said this to you earlier. That's knowing that, I was very aware of the fact that there's the know-nothing party, right? Most people know that. Right? And I didn't know nothing party, about the time that they were rising in prominence, and I never did sort of the math. Well, 1850. Well, gee, wasn't that when Lincoln, what did Lincoln think about all of that? So I think my opening question to you, Jason, is really, how is it that you came to write this book, or maybe just to step on my own headline, how is it that nobody else wrote this book before? Why is this a missing piece of the Lincoln history?
Well, what's fascinating about Abraham Lincoln is that for people who study him, he's frustrating. There's no journal, there's no diary. He was very reticent about what he thought about things. And, you almost have to rely on official papers or tattletales in the cabinet who kept diaries and journals. My interest in Lincoln has been ever since I was in 4th grade. In 4th grade, we had a parents' night in which we did silent vignettes. And one of the vignette out of history was the Lincoln-Douglas debate, and I wanted to be Lincoln. And my 4th grade teacher, who was straight out of the 1950s, said, "You can't, you're too short." So I had to be Stephen Douglas. Ouch! So I swore like Scarlett O'Hara at the intermission of Gone with the Wind that I might be too short to portray Abraham Lincoln, but I'm not too short to study him. And so he's been on my mind since 4th grade. Now, we are all taught certain things about Abraham Lincoln, and Ben, you're not only are you not alone in thinking that Lincoln is not associated with immigration. You're more in the norm, and that even includes brethren in my profession. What we all think and know about Abraham Lincoln is race and the Emancipation Proclamation and the Civil War and the Gettysburg Address and the inaugural addresses and all of those sorts of things. But what people don't know is that long before Lincoln ever even thought or uttered any words about the morality or immorality about slavery, Lincoln had a very sophisticated, even as a young man, an economic philosophy on the future of the United States. And as a young legislator in the Illinois State Legislature, he was forever proposing internal improvements and bridges and canals and whatever would improve and enhance the economic future of the state of Illinois. So with that in mind, when I was offered the opportunity in my department to teach what we have is called the capstone seminar. It's for seniors who are graduating, and theoretically this is the best paper that they write during their 4-year careers, the capstone. When my chairman and good friend who's here tonight, Dr. Gregory Kreider, asked me, I immediately thought, I'm going to do this on Abraham Lincoln. Well, once I agreed to this, without going to Greg and confiding in him, I thought, I don't want to read 5,000 papers on the Emancipation Proclamation, or on the Gettysburg Address, or on the Lincoln-Douglas debates. I want to come up with perspective topics for my students that might be interesting to read. Well, you all know that, that immigration is in the news. So I thought, and this was just several years ago, I thought, my God, I can't think of one thing ever been written about Abraham Lincoln and immigration. And so I did some digging, thinking this might be a really good topic for my students. And then I thought, okay, there's nothing out there. But to be sure, I'm going to do something I haven't done before. I'm going to send out a query on a listserv. I don't even read listservs, though somehow they all flood my mailbox. But I thought, you know, I just don't want to wake up one morning and have someone say, well, I'm really glad you're working on that, but so-and-so just published the Pulitzer Prize-winning definitive account on it. So I send this out, and I get back almost immediately from some of the biggest names in the country in Lincoln studies. My God, do it. In fact, one of them just wrote back, do it, exclamation point. So I thought, well, I'm not giving that topic to my students. That's going to be my next book. And so with the knowledge of Lincoln's economic philosophy in mind that preceded his interest in slavery, I thought I would go back and do some heavy-duty detective work to see what, if anything, was Lincoln's exposure to immigrants and what his philosophy about immigrants were, thinking full well that anybody who had a plan for the economic future of Illinois or an economic future for the United States of America in the 1830s, 40s, 50s, 60s had to include immigration. And each step along the way, I found things that I had never read in any book about immigration or about Lincoln and immigration. And all of the pieces of all this detective work started making me think that this is a topic that cried out for attention, but it's never received the attention. To answer finally in a circuitous way your other side of the coin, why hasn't anybody done it before? It was damn hard. It was. It took a lot of going through sources that nobody would have ever even associated with Abraham Lincoln.
Thank God you did it. I should have said, just a selfish second here to say that thank God for teachers in my world too. We have Claire Tesh and Sarah Burnett on my staff, two wonderful former teachers that we've stolen away from the teaching profession. And when they came to me with the idea of getting involved in a Lincoln Cottage exhibit on immigration, I got to tell you, my first response was, all right, you got 5 minutes. Can't tell me anything. Well, you had 5 minutes, but I was on the phone for the first 3. And they sold it well. And I think in part by the recognition that there was this book and there was this story that needed to be told and that we wanted to be part of. So I'm very grateful to them and for you for telling that story. So tell us a little bit about then where Lincoln comes down on this issue, because it was certainly very controversial then, as I said. 1852, I think, was the peak of the Know Nothing movement. I know from your book that sometime around then, there was about 30 members of Congress that around 1852 that were associated with the Know Nothing party. So that might have been the peak of their time, but that certainly was, that wasn't insignificant. So where did Lincoln fall in this whole spectrum of angst and yet opportunity that was driving the discussions of immigration then, perhaps as now?
It's difficult to imagine now, when we think about a president of the United States having never left the country, that Lincoln never left the country except for a brief trip to Niagara Falls. Which
That count?
that doesn't count. But the young Lincoln was hired to sail down the Mississippi River to the port of New Orleans twice in the 1830s. So he would have been early 20s. Historians point to those trips as being profound in its influence on Lincoln in terms of the institution of slavery, because he saw slaves shackled on boats, he saw slaves picking cotton along the coasts. And all of that is true. But it also had a profound influence on Lincoln, young Abraham Lincoln, when he got to New Orleans, which was the closest thing he ever got to really leaving the country, since the port of New Orleans was cosmopolitan and international. He heard a variety of languages. He saw a variety of occupations. He also saw, for the very first time in his life, significant numbers of free African Americans, Creoles. What this did is it made Lincoln think then, as somebody in their early 20s, that people from foreign lands were an asset as opposed to a liability. So when we fast forward a little bit to Lincoln in the General Assembly, the 4 terms that he served in the General Assembly of the state of Illinois, all of his plans for the development of Illinois, whether it was manufacturing or agricultural, they were contingent upon recruiting, maintaining, and cultivating immigrant labor. So it was something that Lincoln it was on Lincoln's mind very early on. Seeing the value of immigrant labor made Lincoln have a very, very different attitude towards ethnic groups and immigrant groups. His contemporaries saw things in monolithic terms. The Germans, the Irish, the Jews, the Scandinavians. Lincoln never did that. He never painted with broad strokes. He saw each person as a valuable asset to the American economy and to the American future. And so even though, as he matures as a politician, the Irish being of the Democratic Party, whereas Lincoln's career went from the Whigs to the Republicans, the Democrats were never very fond of Abraham Lincoln by any stretch of the imagination, at least politically. And yet he bore no animosity towards them whatsoever. They were just as important to the scheme of things for Lincoln as the Germans, who were very loyal to Abraham Lincoln, the Jews, who were very important and very supportive of Abraham Lincoln, and the Scandinavians. And so, Lincoln takes this trip on the Mississippi River, and he brings it back in his life. And in his neighborhood in Springfield, where he matured as a corporate attorney, and I tell my students that, even though he was a corporate attorney, he still was a good guy.
Obviously.
that they shouldn't paint in broad strokes either with stereotypes about lawyers. And Ben, you're living proof that lawyers are good people.
Just play one on TV.
His exposure to all of these various constituencies, either neighbors, employees of the Lincoln household, or workers in and around Lincoln's neighborhood in Springfield, fastened in his mind even more so that one of the doors that should never be slammed shut in America was the door that brought people over from Europe and incorporated them, assimilated them into a lifestyle in which they could A, find a new life if they needed it, but B, contribute significantly to the fabric of the future of the United States. Lincoln saw this as a positive, where when people in his own party, you mentioned the Know-Nothings, the Know-Nothings had a meteoric rise and they had a meteoric descent. But they were also part of the Republican Party, and they were causing problems. Because some prominent Republicans wanted to exclude immigrants, and Lincoln wanted no part of them whatsoever.
So on that note, I want to share with you, that's one of my favorite parts of this book. There's many here, but there's one in particular where Lincoln had been one of the Know-Nothing, some committee of several local Know-Nothings, among them Richard Ballinger, and approaching Lincoln and talking to him about how they wanted to endorse him, and apparently Lincoln, being the attorney, proceeded to cross-examine him. Lincoln stated that he had belonged to the old Whig Party and must continue to do so until a better one arose to take its place, recalled Ballinger. questioning Mr. Walgamot and somebody else in part of the committee about who were the real Native Americans, Lincoln asked, "Do they not wear breech clout and carry tomahawks?" Lincoln continued by declaring, "We pushed them out from their homes and now turn upon others not fortunate enough to come over as early as our forefathers." He informed them that he could not become identified with the American Party, the other name for the No Nothing Party. They might vote for him if they wanted, that party.
He's a politician.
So might the Democrats.
Yeah,
He died a quick death in American politics today.
Absolutely.
They got to vilify the opponents, but he was not in sentiment with this new party. Gentlemen of the committee, Lincoln concluded, your party is wrrong in principle. So fairly clear in that statement.
Absolutely.
I want to finish this page though, because it also describes a part about Lincoln that I think many of us know and love, is his ability to tell stories, and particularly funny stories. And describing Lincoln's demeanor, Ballinger said that the prairie lawyer's great half melancholy, half sympathetic face was frequently lighted up and almost put one into a trance. The kindly twinkle of the eye, the attractive smile told us there was more he wanted to say. And in vintage Lincoln fashion, he shared a humorous story to illustrate his points to the chastised gentleman. When the Know Nothing Party first came up, I had an Irishman, Patrick by name, hoeing in my garden. One morning I was there with him, and he said, "Mr. Lincoln, what about the Know-Nothings?" I explained that they would possibly carry a few elections and disappear. And I asked Pat why he was not born in this country. "Faith, Mr. Lincoln," he replied, "I wanted to be, but my mother wouldn't let me." So he was able to sort of distance himself, to avoid the association, I think, with the obvious radical sense. It was easy, I think, intellectually to say, all right, so that's wrong. But I don't think we should sugarcoat sort of the more tortured relationship he might have had, that I gleaned from the book. You know, it wasn't a perfect understanding or appreciation of the immigrant's experience. I think you made this point in the book that I think he most closely associated with the immigrant experience of those folks that were working hard to make a good life. But it seemed to me that he struggled a little more with, I think certain classifications, maybe because they were Democrats, but Irish, Mexicans. I think he had a little bit, when he allowed himself to think of them, as you said, as the Irish or the German, he did that occasionally. But when he thought of them as neighbors, I think he associated with them and understood their plight and could, I think, appreciate their contributions better. Talk about that a little bit.
I think you're absolutely right. The one thing about Abraham Lincoln, regardless of the topic, is that you really can't pin him down. You just can't. Lincoln was a product of the West, and he spoke occasionally in disparaging terms about Mexicans, about Asians. He used the N-word on occasion. So you can't, Ben, you're absolutely right. You can't say that he was an angel of any sort. But what you can say is that given his contemporaries, Lincoln's philosophy about the place of an immigrant in American society and history was enlightened. It was enlightened, it meant much more so than his contemporaries. Groups that he had problems with, and all roads eventually lead to the fact that Abraham Lincoln was a pragmatic politician. The Irish didn't vote for him, and there was all of these rumors spreading around that the Irish were going to assault the ballot box, and there are some wonderful quotes of which are not friendly, in essence, saying that we need police everywhere because whatever. But he doesn't say we need police everywhere because the Irish are going to steal the election because they're the damn Irish. Right. What he says is we need police everywhere so that the Irish don't deny anybody else their right to vote, like all the Jews and all the Germans and all the Scandinavians are going to be in line voting for him. Yeah. So he's got this sort of inconsistency about him that has let historians criticize him for many, many years for being nothing more than a politician, for being nothing more than pragmatic and using people, and there are elements of that. He bought himself, literally, he bought himself a German newspaper in Illinois, in Springfield, and put the editor in charge because he knew damn well that that person was going to write editorials in German to get the Germans to vote for him. And the newspaper would have gone bankrupt if Lincoln hadn't sort of financed it and bankrolled it himself. But he's not always picture perfect about things, because your point is a very, very good one. Very few presidents in American history rose from dirt poor to be successful like Lincoln. And so Lincoln would constantly use his background, his success in modeling, like you said, the kind of immigrant who would come, maybe just poverty-stricken, and yet work hard to contribute and work hard to be successful and work hard to be President of the United States one day if they possibly could. So there wasn't a lot of place in Lincoln's life for anybody who was lazy or sloppy. And immigrants were no different. He wouldn't give any immigrant the luxury of being a non-contributor the same way he wouldn't give anybody the luxury of being a non-contributor. So you can look at his quotes on face value and you could say, well, I mean, my God, he uses the phrase greaser, he uses the phrase mongrel, he used the phrase thieves when he was talking about the Irish. Well, yeah, he did. And he used the N-word when he was talking about African Americans. But one of the things that I always try to keep my students aware of, and to keep myself aware of this, whether I'm teaching or writing or even thinking history, is that presentism is a very, very dangerous commodity when you're applying it to history. You can't evaluate Abraham Lincoln by today the same way you can't evaluate anybody in the past by today's standards. And I know a lot of people like to do that, and I know it's in some quarters it's very, very vogue, whether it's Lincoln or Jefferson or Washington. Students find it very, very discomforting when I have to tell them that Thomas Jefferson owned slaves and had an affair with a slave mistress and children by that slave mistress, and yet he was the greatest liberal in America at that period of time in terms of at least the phraseology of things. So in writing this book, you and I have talked about this, so I might as well share this with everybody. I enjoy living in the 19th century. Anything beyond 1900 is current events. So I tell myself that as far as the people that I've studied in the 19th century during Abraham Lincoln's lifetime, he bore no immigrant the animosity that many of his fellow Republicans, former Whigs, did on the basis of their ethnicity, on the basis of their religion, on the basis of their creed. He was willing to give everybody an opportunity to prove themselves and to contribute because that's how he became successful.
And I think the other thing I got from the book was that there was not only that, profound respect for those folks trying to scratch out a life for themselves in the new land, and this sense that, look, really, so if you came then, you're good, but if you come now, you're not. That's obviously something we struggle with today.
Absolutely.
Our romanticism of immigrants of the past and somehow distinguishing them from the immigrants of today. But the other North Star that seemed to drive his concept of this was, not just the labor issue, but the Declaration of Independence, the principles of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. God knows, I wish that there were people that had that same sense today of those fundamental principles of freedom, opportunity, equality before the law. Those seem to be guiding principles for him too. I will just say to you folks in my bit of partisanness about today's immigration system is that those don't exist today. We have a very, very different brand of due process and justice that we meet out in the immigration system. And so I want to talk at some point about what Lincoln might have thought of that now as we've sort of drawn circles around people or judicial systems and said that it's okay that these people get a different form of justice, or that these judicial systems get a don't have as many of the safeguards as others. But I'll save that and just have you talk about what about that North Star in terms of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. How much of that shaped how we thought about these issues and people, regardless of where they came from?
That's a superb question. In some ways, Lincoln was more true to the Declaration of Independence than Thomas Jefferson himself, who wrote it. Lincoln believed, and he was very upset by the notion that the Founding Fathers wrote the Declaration of Independence with white Anglo-Saxon Protestants in mind. That if they hadn't come from England, or if they hadn't been on the par of the Founding Fathers, then the Declaration of Independence really didn't apply to them. And there were a number of his contemporaries who believed that the Declaration of Independence did not pertain to the massive number of immigrants who came in the 1840s seeking refuge and asylum from all of the revolutions in Europe in 1848. Lincoln never wavered from that. His belief in the Declaration of Independence as providing everyone with an opportunity to succeed in America. And there's some wonderful quotes that are in the book about in speeches that he gave, saying that when he's addressing a group of Germans, let's say, that the people in the audience right now have a link to the Declaration of Independence the same way that the descendants of the Founding Fathers, who may be alive and well today in the 1820s and the 1830s, had a link to that Declaration of Independence. They wrote that Declaration of Independence to create, to use your phrase, the North Star. This is what made the United States of America significant and significantly better than other places in the world. And Lincoln rankled at the notion when people would tell him that the Declaration of Independence was not applicable to these people. That these people in some way, shape, or form were lesser human beings, which is why over and over again, long before the Know-Nothings came, I mean, this dates back to Jefferson himself, there were groups of people who wanted to take 5 years to become naturalized, turn it into 7 years to be naturalized, turn it into 12 years to be naturalized, turn it into 19 years, turn it into 24 years, anything that you could possibly do to make these people who come to the United States less of a human being in terms of obtaining citizenship and enjoying any of the fruits of their labor. Because until he was 18 years old, Lincoln's father took every penny that he made. And he hated that. He absolutely hated that. First opportunity he had at age 18, he left and believed in strongly in the notion that a man's labor and what he earns for that labor belongs to him, which sort of fits into his philosophy about slavery. But what I want to reiterate is Lincoln thought about laborers and their wages long before he thought about slaves and their wages. Now, I don't want to minimize Lincoln's commitment to the Emancipation Proclamation. All of that's legit. But the point I'm trying to make is that historians have overlooked and neglected the fact that he had these thoughts in his mind before he had the thoughts about slavery. So the Declaration of Independence was his North Star. And I think there's a quote in there that he said to somebody that he's never had a thought that strayed very far from the Declaration of Independence. And that sums him up completely.
Yeah, it was a religion or a compact for him, and he seemed to very much believe in this notion of distinguishing ourselves from other countries.
Yes.
That they're coming here, and once you have assented to those principles, then you become a part of the society, a citizenship. You indicate here that it was really important to him that citizenship be accessible and affordable.
Yes.
Which is also something I think we've lost sight of. Citizenship now, it's $1,000 to apply for citizenship in the United States today.
I find it absolutely incredible. We just celebrated on April 3rd, I think, the 50th anniversary of the Immigration Law of 1965. We have everybody in the room, unless you've been off of planet know that for the last 5 years we have celebrated the sesquicentennial of the Civil War. I mean, from skirmishes to speeches to debates, you didn't see, unless I missed it completely, you didn't see any celebration of Lincoln's July 4th, 1864 Act to Encourage Immigration, which was the first and last and major act ever passed by the American government to encourage immigration. And
I made the political mistake of using the word encourage.
See, I really believe that had something to do with it.
Yeah,
I do.
I wouldn't doubt that at all. Well, I do with you again. There's a great chapter here on the Declaration of Independence and at the core of Lincoln's thinking, where his close reading of and deep commitment to the Declaration of Independence and his belief that there must be an open field and a fair chance of men of industry, enterprise, and intelligence. So again, I think a wonderful contribution that way. So I'm going to violate your principle of presentism. Because I am going to just ask you to sort of project out, if you can, not how he would fare, in this debate, but I mean, talk to me about what you think about sort of what he would make of going on in immigration debates today. Is it just sort of the more of the same and a disgust that we are in that same cycle?
I
What do you
think
think he comes down on thinking about where we are today?
I think Lincoln would be extremely disappointed and disillusioned by what we have today. You and I chatted a little bit on the phone before we even had tonight, and we talked a little bit tonight too about the Know Nothing Party's alive and well. I mean, he might feel familiar with the fact that 165 years or whatever after the death of the Know Nothings, there's that same kind of an attitude. And I really do think that Lincoln would be shocked at the notion of building walls to keep people out or